Good Wednesday afternoon, everybody. Scott Stevens here with another look at another perspective. We have been inundated across the world with news of all different kinds of flavors, all different kinds of quality, and all different kinds of context. And as I think I wanted to discover or talk about over the next little while, I want to talk about context and information and how important proper context is for information. Because if we take any fact, any bit of data outside of context, then we have colored how people will see it, how they'll view it, how they'll interpret it, and most importantly, act upon it. And it is our actions which propaganda, that censorship wants us to change. If we change our action, then the propaganda, the censorship, and so forth will have had an impact. That's really kind of an important thing for me right now to talk about. So what I want to talk about is the show A Proper Perspective. This will be our title for the day, and that's censorship. And I've been subject to censorship, and I think in one way or another, we all have been. We've even censored ourselves, and that ultimately is the goal of censorship out in the world, is so that we change our thinking, we change how we feel about an issue, so that our inner dialogue with ourselves changes, so that a problem presented out there we accept as a problem, and it changes how we interact with that issue, whether it's climate, whether it's the preponderance of this new frequencies or generation that we shall not speak of, because that begets a censorship of the big tech giants. So we don't even mention the name of that generation of cell phone technology, because boom, you can be demonetized, you can be deplatformed just like that, right, Vicky? And so the other thing we do is basically it's self-censorship, and that's ultimately the goal, is so that we become one with their mode of thinking. So I'd really love to find a way to get Keynote to go full screen on one side, and I can be on the other, but I still haven't found that workaround just as of yet. So ultimately, it used to be the town crier that was censored. If you set up the town crier, he was let's just, shall we say, sympathetic to the mayor, to the governor, to the occupying army, then that town crier would sing their song. He would be their canary. But what we have is an internet. And now that we're 25 plus years into this, what was seen to be a unifying tool, one to bring all of humanity together. But as soon as we saw these communities begin to develop, there became a very powerful way of sharing ideas. Those of us who did not conform to the mainstream had a tool to share our discovery, our informational, our thought discoveries with others. And whether we did or didn't share, that then became a responsibility that rested with us. So what we've come to is, don't let them censor the internet, the freedom of speech. If it is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to the slaughter. That is our founding father, George Washington. The freedom of speech was so vitally important to our founding fathers that it was enshrined as the First Amendment, and freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of redress. These are basic rights given to, or truly given to American citizens, and we can only have them taken away if those that are in power. But between us, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and us, and that ends up being our elected representatives, elected by democracy or through the republic or the representative force of government. Another kind of censorship is scientific censorship, and this is the big one that is ongoing right now. I came to it first through meteorology, through climate, that there was a way to manipulate data, and we'll get to that shortly, to then sculpt the narrative, sculpt the problem. And the scientific censorship has now been spread into our coronavirus issues. Are we getting the true unadulterated narrative about this virus? Or is what we're seeing out there the truth? Are we seeing a 4, 5, 6% death rate, or is that fatality rate, the case fatality rate, the CFR, much, much lower? I guess it depends on if you die from the virus or with the virus. It is like a constitution of the United States or a constitution for the United States. You have one or the other, and the other is just associated with you. You're not necessarily under it. So scientific censorship has become the primary censorship. Another one we've dealt with recently is political correctness, the inability to state certain truths because they may offend certain people. So who determines the narrative upon which offensiveness is gauged? And that is a very, very big issue that we need to have an open and honest and non-triggered, or maybe we need to be triggered kind of discussion around the planet, because political correctness has kind of gotten to the point to where it becomes like whether I should wear a face mask or not. That has become an issue simply of political correctness. And then it takes on so many forms because it also goes down into moralism. And what was moral 100 years ago is offensive today, or just plain old ridiculous. So that is a moving target. And every kind of event that impacts the world, whether it's a 9/11, whether it's Pearl Harbor, whether it's slavery, which still exists, there is a certain aspect of moralism, and there's two sides of that issue. Salman Rushdie once said, "What is freedom of expression without the freedom to offend? Without the freedom to offend, the freedom of expression ceases to exist." And he was known for speaking out against the Iranians, the Ayatollahs. And if you are afraid to speak, then we come back to self-censorship. And there comes a point where you simply cannot censor yourself to the point where I'm not happy. I can't do this any longer. And I did that with meteorology and with climate change and with geoengineering. I couldn't morally do my job any longer because of the fact that I was simply censoring myself. So, what then ultimately is the goal of censorship and disinformation? Because if you've chosen to block out one part of a discourse, one part of a discussion, you're letting another one flourish. They are letting another one flourish. And if they can allow that other side to flourish, then you have humanity choosing to uphold one side versus another side. And then you've got the lobster trying to crawl out of that pot, And either he can or he can't. Likely, if left alone, left unfettered, he would climb to the top of the pot and get out of the pot of water, which is quickly approaching boiling, while those others either want to climb on his back out or simply, in an effort to be one of the herd, pulls him right back in. So, and we'll go from Salman Rushdie to Zygmunt Brzezinski, whose daughter is on MSNBC right now and called for the outright banning of our current president's tweets. Just this past week, agree if you don't agree with me. Now, I can't see a lot of comments over here in the comment column. Yes, Vicky, I see you, but absolutely no one else. Well, there's Karen. She's popped in. So it's like I cannot see the groups posting. Nonetheless, shortly the public will be unable to to reason or think for themselves. They'll only be able to parrot the information they have been given on the previous night's news. This man, I believe, he was in the Carter administration, and Secretary of State, or that was either Muskie. No, that was in Reagan, but nonetheless, he was in the president's cabinet from the mid to late 70s. And this is the agenda. So that where the information is so tightly compartmentalized that we've got a set of information that is given out on the evening news. The 4 a.m. talking points are handed out to CNN, to ABC, to NBC, to MSNBC, to Fox, to the whole kit and caboodle of them. And within that 4 a.m. cable, the news is disseminated over the course of the day. If you're outside of that box, you might run the risk of not getting the good assignments, not able to get a promotion, or just being, as is often the case, just ostracized within the press pool. And if you're not given opportunities to ask a question for your bosses back at the station or back at the channel, then what good are you to them? So the next thing is AP. I found this kind of interesting that they posted this as their banner photo on their Twitter feed, and it is a photographer framing the news amongst a herd of sheep. News from the AP, a taste of the great journalism produced by AP members and customers, managed 24/7 by these editors, and that's the point. Is that they are out there in a herd of sheep and they can frame the story any way they choose. And with news budgets, news gathering budgets in particular, so tiny that larger, what used to be Reuters, we used to be UPI, we used to have all these other news services. And because of the shrinking ad dollar, they've cut back on bureaus in Beirut, bureaus in Moscow, bureaus in Singapore. There are only so many news organizations that have this kind of global reach, and so they're the ones that the Sinclairs, the Comcast will then subscribe to their Newswire service, and the Newswire was the go-to source when I first started back in the early '80s. The Newswires were it. All right, Malcolm X warned us more than 50 years ago. This is the media, an irresponsible media. Quote, it will make the criminal look like he's the victim and make the victim look like he's the criminal. If you aren't careful, the media will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. This is the sort of propaganda tactic that I would call psychological warfare. This was 50 years ago, Malcolm X. And we know how he met his fate, along with the Kennedys, along with, well, we'll end with his quote shortly. All right, and this is how we frame the news. This was photographed over in Europe during some of the marches last spring. And if you want, in France, and if you want to make it look like there's a movement, you get a group of people together. You love them up with attention, and they'll fall in line for you. You'll see them rowing up, and in the picture where they have the photographer versus the reporter, and then the background, it looks like there's a throng of hundreds, if not thousands, of people lined up on this French street, when in reality, it is a group of probably not even 50. So it is your angle of view, the view from which you look at the event, that determines everything. So it is most important that we tend to back out. Vicky says, this is so interesting and important, Scott. We can see how they are manipulating the news and how this then shapes their narrative. And this is the key. This is truly the key to all of news. And this is what I feel and can see is so important as we move ahead, how we view each news story. And you've got to look at all of them, whether it's the BBC, whether it's French, whether it's any of the American ones, that there's a reason they have spent that very, very precious news hour or news half hour choosing which stories they pluck out of everything that's happening. There's hardly a story that if tonight you go watch the CBS Evening News, any one of those stories would have been a headline leader just last year. In fact, an epic story because of their monumental proportions. And today there's so much news that how they want to shape what you think inside your own head becomes their goal for the day. So we'll pop on down here, back to climate. So how low could we go? Dr. Jean Esper, the head of dendrosciences at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, quote, the purpose of removing samples is to enhance a desired signal. The ability to pick and choose which sample to use is an advantage unique to dendroclimatology. And this has to do with snow. This has to do with ice. This has to do with sea ice. This has to do with the conversion of water to snow. And then that begs the question, how low could we go? And this was in tree research. So as you choose the data, you cherry pick the data upon which models are built, upon which we sculpt a narrative, determines the story packaged, put together, and put in front of your consumer. And your consumer is the one that creates, or shall we say, shapes public opinion. There will always be some, I guess, like me and probably like you, if you're then watching, that will not bite. They'll see it. They've done enough thinking. They've done enough thinking on their own to be able to say, no, that just doesn't fit the narrative. That doesn't fit the storyline. That doesn't fit the data upon which I have built my reality or my understanding of whatever topic it is we're talking about. So here we come to George Orwell and doublethink. Doublethink means the power of holding two contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously, and then somehow, through some kind of cognitive dissonance, accepting both of them. And here's one of them from the Washington Post just not all that long ago. Trump's surprise Syria pullout is a giant Christmas gift to our enemies, when previously the same columnist, Max Boot, had said Trump can't do anything right. We don't need troops in Syria. So then what's the narrative? Stand back and look at these two stories, and there are literally dozens of these examples where the same authors, the same columnists, the same opinionists in the A-list media out there who have said one thing about a story, and days, if not weeks later, will come up with another headline, another article with a very different spin or different angle on this, while previously something was positive and now it is an unmitigated disaster. Same with climate. We'll go back just a little bit in time. The big freeze, scientists have found other indications of global cooling, and that being the so-called circumpolar vortex. This was back in 1974. And now today, we're still having these polar vortexes. They've not gone anywhere, and they're not going anywhere because they're always there. But they need to spin it to hold up to support a narrative that they've developed, how frigid polar vortex blasts are connected to global warming. I'm sorry, if a system is warmer, then the polar vortex blasts simply would be weaker. They wouldn't be penetrating farther south, and wouldn't be, as a result of their lessening importance, be an issue that would even warrant a headline. All right, I'm going to go a little bit closer to the COVID issue now that we're dealing with. Across the mainland, this is an amazing gal. Jennifer's saying if you're not following her, you're not kind of getting the inside story. You're not getting Chinese citizens' view of what's happening in mainland China during this epidemic, and probably now during Hong Kong and Taiwan is likely going to be next underneath the CCP's boot here if we're not really, really careful. This baby is going to be a big news item and will likely in the very short term eclipse COVID as the news of the day. Across the mainland, the Chinese people who have been frustrated by the government's disassembling have come up with jokes like this. How many monkeys died? Well, 26 caves collapsed. How many monkeys died? Well, only 5,000 trees ruined. How many monkeys died? Well, all are alive. All alive monkeys transferred to safe places. How many monkeys died? Relatives of the dead monkeys are emotionally stable. Well, how many monkeys died? Well, we saved one today. Deflection at every corner. When you're asked a question about an issue that needs to be addressed because you're the one in authority, then we need this is what that type of consciousness does, is they deflect or they project, meaning that which they have been accused of project onto the other party that they're trying to deflect from the crimes, the sins, the errors of their ways upon the other. Psychologists know all about this, and it is in many ways an art of warfare. So this has been kind of a meme that we have seen and will see over and over again, where you have the CCP propaganda covering the World Trade Center's eyes. And if you cover their ability to see what's happening, that which comes out of their mouth will obviously not be relevant or truthful to the story. So this is Luc Montagnier, a Frenchman, and he was crucial back in the 80s in first isolating and identifying the virus, the HIV virus that causes AIDS. And it is his, not even opinion, but his scientific conclusion that this virus has been engineered, a very meticulous job, the craftsmanship of a watchmaker in COVID's genetic sequence. And that continues on. So what we're looking at is back to the WHO, why this organization was demanding countries impose zero border controls. It was also campaigning against the profiling of international travelers in order to prevent the stigmatization of the Chinese people. We're back to political correctness. We first reported on the WHO telling countries not to impose travel bans back at the end of January, when us, on the team I'm a part of now, were already stockpiling food. You could see if the China had to lock down Wuhan on January 23rd, that the beast was out. Straight up, it was out. And because the WHO was doing doublespeak, do not close the borders, there is not a problem. When with our own eyes, with the own Chinese journalists that were out there telling us we have a problem, we're not getting addressed, the government is not admitting it, they're not even telling us the truth, then we knew that there were massive holes all over that Chinese border, and the virus was coming out. So in early February, the general director of the WHO Health Organization reiterated in a statement of which he said travel restrictions can have the effect of increasing fear and stigma, not restricting the movement of the virus, but he's worried about fear and stigma. Right up to the end of February, a month, 5+ weeks after Wuhan was locked down, and we saw the Chinese police welding doors to apartments shut. When you see somebody going door to door to door to door, taking temperature checks, hauling out people that are sick, or simply because their hospitals are too full, welding doors shut and locking them out, it would tend to induce a little bit of panic. And even at that time, the WHO went full on doublespeak, just telling them the rapid spread of the disease is not a problem. So what's really happening? What's the goal of all this propaganda, of this doublespeak, of this plain bold-faced lying? They lied about the Maine to start a war with Spain. That was 1898. What was the result of that? The United States took possession from Spain of Cuba, Puerto Rico, portion of the Virgin Islands, and the Philippines. There are probably other islands that I'm not mentioning, but nevertheless, that was the goal. There was a large agenda about how to make the United States a world power. Lied about the Lusitania. That got us into World War I after non-intervention, isolationist, almost nationalistic, but not necessarily in a bad way. The mood, the public opinion was Europe's problem, not our issue. But they took down that ship, and that changed the tide of the opinion just enough that our boys went overseas. They lied about Pearl Harbor after pushing Japan through sanctions, through blockades, through the restriction of access to oil, to coal, to energy. Now, what other countries have we seen the United States doing that to in the last 10 years? There's a small list where this same action is working on that. They lied about the Gulf of Tonkin, and all of a sudden we're in Vietnam. All of a sudden we're there. They lied about incubator babies to start Desert Storm. They lied about weapons of mass destruction to start the Iraqi war. So what was the agenda, and where have we honestly failed to let go of? Even in Syria, this last one, they lied about the attacks in Syria to get us into a war with Syria. We're over there with no ISIS left, and we've got our flag staked in land surrounding oil wells. So that was the agenda. We're back to natural resources, which tends to be the biggest issue upon which we fight. So some of us understand the mechanics of our economic, political, and social machine and we recognize that they're broken. The broken system cannot be fixed because it has been corrupted by people with evil intent. We could call them globalists, but also, and we've got to recognize this, and it's another point of view, that it wasn't there to cause thrivability, to cause a benefit to all of us. It was simply a system designed to fail. And we're going to go back to the fiat monetary system at this particular point. What was the agenda? And if we step back and see what's happened over the last week, the agenda was to crash almost everything and then replace it with a centralized behemoth, a global empire. The intent is to force the masses to accept this new world order using a false choice, because we've been denied the information upon which to make the correct choice. We can have chaos or death, or order through total Orwellian control. Peace, sovereignty, and freedom are not offered as choices, and you would honestly think that they would be an option, but they're not right now. As Richard N. Gardner, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for International Organization under Kennedy and Johnson, so we're stepping back a period in time into the Cold War, and a member of the Trilateral Commission, wrote in April 1974 to issue of the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR, the Journal of Foreign Affairs. This referenced on page 558 in an article titled "Hard Road to World Order." you begin to see that this is 40 plus years ago, almost 50 years ago, how long this has been going on. This is a multi-generational program, multi-generational. Quote, in short, the house of world order will have to be built from the bottom up rather than from the top down. That will look like a great booming, buzzing confusion. Where are we now? To use William James's founding or famous description of reality, but an end run around national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned frontal assault. The answer offered to every disaster is always more centralization, even if centralization was a part of the problem from the beginning. The coronavirus pandemic will simply be no difference. So they've made us afraid of a virus, something that either is going to destroy us, and so we walk around in masks and fear. We don't go out. We got all the toilet paper we're going to need for months, but we're still kind of change. It's impacted how we think about something as basic as the air. We really need to ban this before someone gets hurt as we're looking at a campfire. So broadly, I think there's three possibilities. One, we return to the status quo ante of a system that has been designed for a world that had long ago changed and was at best barely coping with the emerging realities. This one was probably a new world order that was designed to come into fruition at some point during the previous administration, and likely at the end of the last financial crisis, if not during Ebola in 14. And that bug just didn't get as far as this one did. Or two, continue on an accelerated path of deglobalization in favor of nationalism and local solutions, even in the phase of, or more accurately, in reaction to challenges like pandemics, climate change, false or imagined or real, but we don't really know the causes, and then the disruptive consequences of artificial intelligence, whose very nature demand global solutions. This is something that we are not appreciating. Artificial intelligence, artificial technology, and its ability to think for us. And I know we do not have clarity on how far this has already been advanced. We have Google, which has AI which writes itself to more quickly, more completely solve the AI stated goals. So it will stop at nothing to accomplish that which it was programmed to do. And number three, use the experience of having stared into the COVID-19 abyss to re-engineer systems, institutions, protocols in ways that might be relevant to the 21st century. I think we'll probably doubt the first, fear the second, and hope for the third. All right, the duty of a true patriot is to protect his country from its government. It's sad that we have to go back nearly 250 years to find statesmen who think this way. There are a few out there, but they are far, far outnumbered by those that are members of these global New World Order institutions. So when the debate is lost, slander becomes the tool of the losers. How often do we see news, let's just say troublemakers on social media, where this is the only tool they have? They have foregone their logic, foregone their reasoning, foregone their kindness and humanity to be able to sculpt a properly reasoned reaction. Slander is too easy to just call someone else a name, and then it's done in their eyes. But what it really does is reveal the depth to which they have looked at an issue, explored the reasons behind it, and come to a proper conclusion, one that they didn't just pick up, as Mr. Brzezinski said on the evening news. Because if all we can do is repeat that which we see on the evening news, then their job is nearly done. JFK, in one of his great speeches just prior to that fateful November afternoon in Dallas, Texas, back in 1963, for we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies on covert means for expanding its severe sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. It's like he mentioned every single three-letter organization, school of thought, university, because we're aware of Operation Mockingbird that has, and this was a CIA's intended goal to sculpt, frame, and control the discourse and the flow of information, not just in this country, but ultimately because Lady Liberty was here and the United States of America was held in such high regard that what we consumed as news became the gold standard. But this is where I am. Because we've identified the problem, because we've recognized the problem, there are solutions. And day by day, there are folks. I just was on a site, kim.com, a New Zealander who is developing platforms so we can share data. We can have layers of encryption upon which they cannot delete. There's one story that came up today, how there was a documentary, a COVID documentary called The Plandemic that I shared on my Facebook page a couple of weeks ago. And Google was requested, of all things, the Washington Post, to go into someone's personal Google Drive and delete their copy of this documentary about COVID. And it was just sharing someone's experience with the virus, the doctor's experience with virologists, with Dr. Anthony Fauci, with those that are in power that were questioning their motives and their actions, not giving direct information on what people should do, but just giving them an informed opportunity to make that choice on their own. And I think the point is that we will get to the point where we will create our own solutions. And once we begin to work to that, we will overcome this growing epidemic of censorship. It's crazy that it's had to bring an epidemic to show us how intense this censorship is. All right, everybody. I see your comments in there. Just a limited few are getting through, but I'm glad you stopped by today, participate in this discussion. Karen, Vicky, Reese, it's always good to see you pop on in here. Marlene as well. There's probably a lot in here, and I'll come on through those and respond to them shortly. All right. Well, there is a lot of work ahead of us. There really, really is. And it will take a movement of monumental proportions so that we can reframe the discussion that we're having in this country. Because whether it's a Democrat, Republican, conservative, or liberal, those aren't the solutions. It's going to have to come from someone else who hasn't been initiated into that group, that cabal that Kennedy spoke of just moments ago. All right, everybody, have a great weekend. I'll see you next Wednesday. Keep looking up.